you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join Doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
What do you do when you do not have an agenda? That is what we will be discussing in our episode, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Dr. Erin Hurley. As doctors, we're so used to having our schedules packed, but what if that constant need for an agenda, it was burning us out? So we'll be talking about all of that, why is that important, and what can we do? And Erin, I would love to start talking about some examples and things that have come up either in ourselves or some of the women that we coach. What comes to mind just hearing this topic?
Well, a recent example in my own life that comes up is I traveled internationally to England to a trauma conference. And the first 2 days, I had one item on the agenda list. I was going to meet in the evening with a physician. And the rest of the day had no agenda besides getting checked into my hotel. And it allowed me to explore, to take my time, to walk slowly, to pay attention to my surroundings and meander. And with that lack of agenda, I literally saw zero, touristy landmarks while I was in London. I explored the area around Paddington train station because that's near where I was staying. And I stumbled across the museum where Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin was right down the road. There was this very quirky bronze statue, I think it was, on the corner, and it had all of these mystical creatures having like tea on the sidewalk. This really cool photo op. I wandered into an amazing coffee place and had a great conversation and bought some coffee to bring home and a t-shirt to bring home for my boys. So I had my souvenir, gifts checked. And then I went on this lovely walk in a new area I'd never been to in London before. It was called Little Venice, and it was walking along the canals, and there was these cool little long, skinny canal houseboats, and just this beautiful scenic walk. And it was lovely to have several hours to just meander. And if I was hungry, I got a bite to eat, got some tea at the coffee house. And it was it was so great. The first day, I decided to do the same thing the next day and added nothing to my agenda except wandering around. And I got a little bit of work that day done as well. But I discovered the cool place in the coffee shop, whereas it was a perfect place to return to get some work done. So that was me having no agenda. And it just allowed me to breathe and have a very parasympathetic day using my calm nervous system instead of allowing anything to stress me out. And Joanne, you also shared with me during your time off, or not really time off, but time between your transition from your old work and your new work, where you had some unstructured time too. And I'd love to hear about that. I think that would be a great example for our listener to hear as well.
That is such a foreign concept for us, the not having an agenda, which is part of why we wanted to bring it up here. And my example is a little bit different because it was intentional time without official work, right? Because like you said, it wasn't off. I have to reframe that over and over. And it was very humbling. And it kind of reminded me first how much I love what I do, because there was a change in my sense of self. But one of the bigger things was how uncomfortable it felt initially of not having my schedule be set for me externally. All that I need to do is when is my first patient and when is my last patient, right? I'm overgeneralizing, but that's how a lot of us have it in our clinics. So then all of a sudden, I don't have patients. I have like a million things to do, but no patients, or not a place to go, or not a schedule that someone else gave me. And it was nice, obviously, to have a little bit of freedom, like Erin was saying, and I wrote that down, parasympathetic day. We all need more of that. And I cannot say that there were all parasympathetic days, but I did give myself permission to say, I'm going to go to a yoga class in the middle of the day. I literally one day went to have ice cream in the middle of the day, and it felt like such a treat. And I think because this was several weeks of that, realizing, first of all, how much I needed, because that's how my brain has been wired for decades. Like, I've never had days of no schedule, like days and days in a row, besides on vacation. Like you were saying, even when we go on vacations, we have, it's nice that we have a plan, but we sometimes get so rigid. And I think that's part of what we're talking about. It's the rigidity that sometimes gets in the way of flexibility and intentional time to really relax. And actually, just this week, I started seeing patients in my prayer practice, and I was so happy. And it was still not super structured because I'm not full. So it's a patient here and there. So it's still finding that flexibility in the structure. I know that sounds like two words that don't necessarily go together, but it took me a while to feel settled in my system, to be, this is okay, this is intentional, and you are building a practice. It's not like we're on an extended vacation. And then this is a slight side note that we had talked about in other episodes, of my over planning in my head of all the things I was going to be doing, and having to really reframe that, of then saying, okay, what's the most important thing right now? And let me find time for that, while I'm also finding time to relax and do other things. And I can go on and on about it. And I'm going to have to think back. Thank you for the question of what were all the things I learned in this process, because it's definitely something different than what a lot of us experience as physicians and women in medicine and professionals, when we are so overbooked and kind of stuck to our schedule.
And this, I want to point out something we don't always notice. I hear lots of complaints about, how little physicians and healthcare providers have over their schedule. And at the same time, when somebody's creating your schedule for you, as you were saying, there's a lift on the emotional and mental burden, because you don't have to create it yourself. And so just a reminder too, if you are working for an organization, not for yourself, they are taking on some of that mental load, rather than you having 100% flexibility on your schedule, as Joanne was saying. So part of one of the things I want to do is remind us that when somebody else is taking some of that burden, maybe we can appreciate that instead of just seeing the negative pieces of that. And that's, me putting my coaching hat on to try to flip the switch and give a different perspective on what that's doing for you, instead of just what that's taking away.
Yes. And we talked already a little bit about it, but why is this so important for women in medicine?
One of the things that being very scheduled can do is it can be very helpful during patient care. Knowing when you're going to show up, knowing what your patient's schedule looks like, knowing what your support staff looks like, if you're a surgeon, knowing what the OR schedule is, having that set, I don't want to say set in stone, but where everybody knows what to expect, can be extremely helpful. And then in another environment, say for your home environment, it may not be as helpful. And one example of that in my own house is I oftentimes will get up, sometimes a few hours before my husband. Usually it's at least a little while before my husband. And once I start my day, my brain is on fire, ready to go and ready to add structure. So I know what to expect. My husband is like, can you just give me some time to drink my first cup of coffee before bombarding me with all of these questions about what do you have planned for the day? What's on your list? What can you get done? What do we need to do? All of those things. And for him, it's an imposition. And for me, I'm just trying to put some of that structure in the day. And I need to recognize that either give him the time and capacity, or maybe we have the conversation the night before so that he can start his day in a manner that works for him, while also allowing me to schedule my day in a manner that works for me. But again, recognizing that structure doesn't always work for all personality types, all environments, all days. So that's one thing, where recognizing where is this a fit and where is it not a fit. And then also, is it getting in the way? Is you having a schedule getting in the way of being fully present? And if we're thinking about all of the things that need to get done, and I'm assuming if you're anything like Joanne and I, you're always going to have a to-do list. It is going to be never ending. And can we find a way, as difficult as it can be, to create space where it's okay to ignore that to-do list and allow the others that you're sharing space with? Maybe it's your partner, your spouse, maybe it's your kids or your grandkids or your pets, where you can let go of the agenda that's needed with that to-do list. And maybe it's coaching yourself, having a mantra that this is my unstructured time because too much of my time is already structured. And if it feels uncomfortable, then maybe it just means you need more practice. So again, it can serve us very well. And it can also get in the way of having really strong connections with people when the agenda is more important than our presence. And we learn from an early age, or an early time in our career. Think about medical school, medical training, how many hours of the day are called for. And you might barely have time to sleep and get all your studies done, or barely time to sleep, eat, use the facilities, and get all the expectations done when you're on call. And so it can be really hard to then, when do we in our career say, oh, I deserve to have some unstructured time. I deserve to have some freedom from that schedule, from that to-do burden. And how can I incorporate and look for times to do that, and without the guilt, without feeling bad, without, having negative thoughts in your head because you feel like you're doing nothing, or telling yourself you're being lazy, which is not. It's actually creating a healthier, sustainable version of you.
That is so wise. I'm going to repeat that question because it's so profound. Is the schedule getting in the way of your presence? Because we need to be so mindful. I love the distinction that you just reviewed of having a schedule serves us in many ways. We show up, we do our thing, we see our patients, we do our work, we meet our commitments. But when our brain is so used to it and almost like depending on it, which is what I recognize in this weeks that felt so uncomfortable, then saying how is it getting in my way? How is it keeping me from doing other things that I want to do or that are important to me? And like you said, the most important, presence. And I'll repeat it again, having parasympathetic days. I think we need to make that a thing. And I also think of women in medicine, like we've talked so many times, where it's also the expectation, and it's how we get so much of our sense of self. It's how much do we have scheduled, and how, even the little breaks then get filled with note writing or meetings or phone calls. I remember feeling, I don't know what the emotion was, but like having a friend saying like, hey, I'm near your office. When is your lunchtime so that we can meet? And then it's like a mix of, I don't know, pride and sadness of saying, oh, I don't have a lunchtime. Right. And that's where we need to make those decisions. And sometimes it's okay. I've chose to schedule patients during lunchtime so that I could leave earlier, because leaving earlier to come to my family was more important. So it made sense to me. But frequently it's not that. Like it's just this overpacking, and then really having to unwind. And like we always talk about in here, that awareness. So, and with a lot of compassion, of course, like I always say, that part of it, it's because that's kind of how we were trained, and I'm using my air quotes, or that's how, right? Like that doctor programming that we talk about, or, what some belief that someone gave us, if you're not working super hard and you're not overpacked, then you're not a good doctor. We're like, where do those things come from?
And I'm going to share a visual for those watching on YouTube, and I'll try to describe it for those listeners. So this is a chart from the book, The One Thing. And what it shows is our decision-making capacity. And basically what the chart shows is over time, if we start the day at the top of our decision-making capacity, then what happens with time is that it quickly diminishes. And without a break, we are working at the lowest level of our decision-making capacity, because in this study that studied Israeli judges and that reviewed parole, and so every 4 to 14 minutes, I think it was, somebody else is asking, "Can I get parole? Can I get parole?" And their default answer was no. And the only times that they had yeses was at the beginning of that shift, and their day was broken into 3. So when they came in the morning, they had a late morning coffee break, and then they had an afternoon lunch break. And if you were going to have those judges at the top of their game, on their A game making decisions, it was only immediately after a break. And we're human too, just like those judges are human. And so I picture a different graph. So this graph, again, has 3 peaks, and then it goes down into the valley of poor decision making. And I've created my own version of that, where when we are taking no breaks and giving ourselves no time to regroup, whether that's a 2-minute walk, outside, or taking a lunch break, then what happens is we might have started the day at a peak, and then over the next, period of time, hour and a half, you now go down to having no reserves, and now you're functioning at the bottom of your decision making. And if you take no breaks and have no unstructured time, you're now staying there for the rest of your day. And think about how difficult your life is, and how many decisions and how many people's lives are in your hands. And is that really where we want to function? And again, using this term productivity break for my clients, and even some of my healthcare providers that I put my coaching hat on when I'm in the office, my physical therapist, she takes productivity breaks based on the information I've shared with her. And she'll take a loop around the parking lot if she has a 3 to 4 minute break between patients, and then comes back ready to serve at an even higher level. So it doesn't have to be big or profound, but even finding little micro unstructured time during your workday can then create bigger, decision-making banks and bigger energy banks to help you get through your day, so you're not completely depleted by the end of your day. It doesn't have to be super complicated or take much time.
So, Erin, you mentioned a few things already, but what are some specific things that we can cultivate so that we're more intentional and we have that good balance between benefiting from the schedule and then also the open space?
Number one is almost always going to be awareness. If you aren't even aware of what your schedule looks like and where the holes are, and I know I use a full focus planner that helps me plan and look and see my schedule, how full is it? Are there open spaces? So raise your own awareness. What does your schedule look like? Not just when do you show up for work and when do you leave? Not just what does your patient care look like or your work day look like? What does your day look like when you're at home? Because oftentimes we don't structure that enough to make sure that we've blocked some time for openness, blocked some time just to be and just to connect. So that's number one, raise your own awareness about your schedule. And then the next step is, now that you've got awareness, if you have no open space in there, no unstructured time, where can you move things around so that you can create it and then put it in the schedule? My block time, my unstructured time, my connection time, whatever you want to call that. This can also affect your time off. If you're taking vacation time and you're working up to the very last minute, having to cram your packing in, and then you leave and then you come back and you go back to work the next day, that is not necessarily going to help you have a decompressing or parasympathetic vacation or time off. And oftentimes we come back even more depleted because we did not create unstructured time either during the vacation time or during the pre and post vacation. So again, be intentional and realistic. not always relying on our optimism. What's the realistic piece? How much time is it really going to take to pack? And then multiply, according to the book Essentialism, multiply by 1.5. And then that's a better estimate, because oftentimes we underestimate what it's going to take. If it feels really uncomfortable to have unstructured time, then I would say it probably means you need to practice it more. Have someone hold you accountable. If you have a friend, a partner, a child, another role model who does a better job than you do, ask them for some support and ask them to hold you accountable. And then one of the other issues that I've come across when I'm coaching women in medicine, we oftentimes have an outward look. We're always taking care of others, whether that's our patients, our staff, our family members, our spouse, our partner, our kids, our pets. We take big roles in taking care of others. And oftentimes that means we are leaving ourselves out of that equation. And so if it feels uncomfortable because you have a script in your head, this is being selfish to take care of myself or to put my needs first, then I would ask you to do two things. One is ask yourself, what's the harm that it's going to cause if I do not take care of my own needs? What am I losing out on? How is this affecting my sustainability, my burnout, my mental health, my physical health? And then the other piece of that is keeping yourself so busy an escape route? And, when I just came back from a trauma conference, and there's a lot of talk of numbing. And we might think of, people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, that they're numbing from past trauma. We can also numb ourselves by working too much, focusing on other people's problems. So I would also like you to dig a little deeper, peel back some of those layers of the onion and ask yourself, is there something I'm trying to get away from? Is there something that's uncomfortable for me to spend time with? And if that's the case, then getting the proper support to allow you to address that so you can put yourself at the top of the list and take some time to connect, not just with others fully, but also with yourself.
Wow, those are so good. I like that last piece. I call those healthy denials, because we can be very productive. So it kind of fools us into believing that we're doing everything right. And it could be okay, but then it could also be avoidance of something else that we need to be dealing with or feeling, or even avoidance of how uncomfortable it is to have downtime. Something that I keep on saying out loud lately, and I keep on reframing it, is my first thought is seeing patients is easier. And then I have to reframe it, not that seeing patients and being a doctor is easy, but in this time of my life, that seems easier than having to figure out how to build a website, and structuring my time. So we also have to be so mindful of what are the thoughts that our brain is giving us and questioning, are they true? That awareness that Erin was mentioning. And this is so important. I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because again, we're trying to believe that this is the way, and we have to question these things that have been programmed, or maybe a way of thinking, a belief that was serving us before doesn't serve us anymore. So these are really good topics to review and good insightful questions to ask ourselves, and asking, like Erin said, when was the last time that you took time to explore and be curious and have a parasympathetic day, or even a parasympathetic moment? I'm going to keep on repeating that. And also questioning, having the compassion that, right, like we're busy women, so in that the schedule serves us, but then also are we creating that intentional time? And I'll review some of the steps that Erin gave us, because they're so good and different than what we would normally think of having more awareness, intentionally creating more time for ourselves, that open space, and actually putting in our schedule, because it unfortunately is the first thing that we would get rid of if anything comes up. And like I shared, if it's uncomfortable practice. Like, I think eventually I got a little bit better with it. And these are, again, such insightful questions of what's the cost? What are you missing out? Is it keeping you from your present? And are you using it to numb or escape? These are excellent. Thank you so much, Erin. What is maybe one extra thing that you would like to add to all these amazing things that you've shared already?
I did use this prompt at my most recent group coaching session, and it was the common answer when I asked them what they do during unstructured time was watch TV. And watching TV can be just fine. And yet at the same time, I'm oftentimes asking those questions. Is this good for you now? You get some downtime. It's unstructured. You're not having to do things while you're watching TV. And is it good for future you? So if somebody was sharing that, if they're watching Netflix and they're watching a series and you know how it just queues up one after another, then oftentimes they're getting sucked into that series and it's actually having a negative consequence because it's preventing them from going to bed on time. It's preventing them from getting back to the work that they wanted to do because they wanted to take a shorter break. And then that choice in downtime actually had negative consequences. So I would also ask, is there something other than scrolling on social media or watching TV that you can substitute at least some of the time? For me, I've been substituting taking a walk with my husband and my dog. And that is much healthier for our relationship, our physical and mental health than sitting in front of the TV. And so that's something I'm also trying to role model are there other ways that aren't any more work that can be used that you get even more benefit out of that downtime? So a little bit of structure and intention behind it, not just, once I sit down on the couch, now it's TV time and I'm not going to get up and I'm going to go to bed late. So being aware of what your choices for that downtime are having consequences on.
Yes, and coming back to that presence instead of just the doing. This is great. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And I hope this was very helpful for everyone listening. And please share and stay tuned because our next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.